I was asked from the Aguda to speak about a topic which is a very broad topic, which is impossible to cover the whole thing within half an hour, 45 minutes. But I'll try to cover a little bit and give a general outline on the problematic point of the issue. I was asked to speak about how to be a Ben Torah and stay a Ben Torah and going to work. This is a very tricky topic, and one of the things which is tricky today is we have to define work in a Torah-like way. Because we are very used to that we define a Ben Torah in a Torah-like way. That we know a Ben Torah is someone which sits and learns, or is medaktik in mitzvahs, or doing the right things. That's what we are used to when we speak about Ben Torah. But when you want to speak about a topic like this in real Torah context, we have to have both sides clear. What does it mean to go to work? And what does it mean to be involved in growth in Torah? So in order that we should understand right, what does it mean that the person goes to work, I want to quote, not reading inside really, because it's the Chovos HaLevavos, only I open up the Sefer, you should believe me that it's in the Sefer. It is in Shara Bitochen, in the end of the third Perek. In the very end of the third Perek in Shara Bitochen, the Chovos HaLevavos speaks how a person is choosing his profession. So he says you have to choose the profession according to what you feel is fitting your koyches hanefesh. That means you feel a certain skill which you have, and this skill could be realized under certain circumstances, like you have a skill in dealing with people, so you go into real estate, or you have a skill for numbers, so you go into being an accountant, or whatever your skill is. You are choosing your profession according to the skill which you have, which the Borei Olam gave you. That's first. Second is you have to think that you will be ready to accept the difficulties of the work. So that's the way you approach your work. So the work is not approached because it makes the most money. The work is approached because it fits you. But there will be incidents in your working which will not fit you anymore. And then things are getting difficult. And you have to be aware of that you are willing to accept those difficulties when you go into a profession. And now comes the big chiddush. And now the person sees that he is not so successful in his endeavor. It's not so successful. He thought that he'll make a lot of money, and he doesn't. And it sounds like to him that he has to change profession. The Chovos HaLevavos says, the bitochen gives that you should not change your profession, because that is what Hashem wants from you. That's your part in the world. So that's a big chiddush. A profession is not only there in order to make money, that I should be able to survive and do the real thing, which is learning and davening. No. A profession is a real thing. It is what the Borei Olam wants from a person according to his personality. So that's very important in these days, because in these days people have a tendency, when they hear a rabbi speak, that it's only said, a profession, it's really a klola, and it really doesn't matter what you do. You only have to be yotzei chayvo in order that you should pay your tribute to the klola of Adam Rishon, and never mind what you do, and that's the way the Borei Olam will provide your parnasa. The Chovos HaLevavos doesn't say that. he says, it's a very important decision what you are involved in the world, because it's your place. That's what you are created for. It's a part of your personality, and you have to realize your personality in your profession. Your koiches hanefesh has to be realized. There are difficulties. You have to be ready to take up the difficulties. So that is the Torah approach to parnosa. That's your personal involvement in parnosa. So a person has to be very careful that he should not simply go for where there is more money. He has really to think and contemplate whether this is fitting me or not, because it's the question what Hashem wants from him, because he wants from him being involved in the world. Now, there is another ingredient which this Chovos HaLevavos doesn't speak about that, but there is another ingredient which is very important in making money or having a parnosa. You have only parnosa when people need you. You can be an agent of the best shoe brand in the world. You know, I don't want to go into being a personal, but I know when I once saw that you can buy shoes, Bruno Magli, you can buy that for $800 or something like this. So you can be an agent for the best shoes, and you go to Zimbabwe and open up a fancy shoe store. You will not have any parnosa, because people go barefoot. Parnosa means people need you. Parnosa doesn't mean make money. No. Parnosa doesn't mean that, to make money. Parnosa means that you provide the needs of the people. People need you and you provide that. So this includes a thing which is called achrayus. You have achrayus towards the people. Your parnosa fits you. But together with that it fits you, you can't only make a thing which fits you and no one needs that. So then you still don't have parnosa. Yeah? You have to see that people need this service. And when people need a service, you have to be responsible. So this is the responsibility which calls you to work. You are responsible. You signed the contract, so you have to fulfill that contract. You sell, you open your store. You are responsible to the people that when it says it opens at 9 o'clock, it opens at 9 o'clock. It's not only because you will lose your parnosa, it's simply irresponsible. You have to be responsible to the people. So in your worldly endeavor, who is in the center? The customer. It's not you. You are like serving the customer. This is true from the very simple endeavor till the spitz endeavor today with the COVID. You know, the owner of Pfizer now is like very happy, let's say, because what? He put the customer, which is in terrible pain, that you have to have a vaccine against COVID, he put that in the center and he provides the need. So he found a very good source of parnosa, but it's because the customer is central. That's your approach. And I know that the American upbringing, that's an ideal, that you don't think about your own thing, you think about the benefit of the customer. He always says the customer is always right and you put him in the center. That is what you are involved. You are responsible towards the world. You are not responsible towards yourself. Yes, you have a certain responsibility to bring in money, but there, the Chovos HaLevavos says, it's also bitochen. But you can't have bitochen and go to, again, Zimbabwe. I have nothing against, my daughter is in South Africa, so you can't be, but when you are in Zimbabwe, and you can't have bitochen, I'll take the best shoe to Zimbabwe, I will have bitochen that I'll make parnosa. This is foolish. And no one will tell you that this is a part of your bitochen. But when you see that people need you, even though now your responsibility towards your own parnosa is like shaking because you see it doesn't really go. So then the Chovos HaLevavos says that you have to have parnosa, bitochen. You have to have bitochen, and the parnosa will come in. So it sounds like the main emphasis in having your hishtadlus done in parnosa is that you should provide the right service according to your koiches and nefesh, but you provide the service for the people, what they need. In a certain way, being involved in parnosa has something selfless. There is something selfless to it. And you see it in the culture, in the Western culture. You see that over and over again, that the ideal picture of a real businessman always has somehow a selfless aspect to it. That you want to help the other people, you want to provide and really put the best thing in front of your customer. That's a very noble thing, but that's an important thing. Torah wants that from you. The Borei Olam wants that from you. The Borei Olam wants that you should be involved in the world and you should provide the best service. It's like a part of Bein Adam L'Chaveroi. You are doing a tova to the other. Makes no difference whether you make money or not, but you do a tova to the other with your own skills. And you got these skills from the Borei Olam, and you make with them a tova for other people, a very noble endeavor. But this endeavor has a problem in it. So that's a Rashi in Shabbos. The Rashi in Shabbos says that now when a person comes up to Shomayim, so they'll ask him several questions. The first is whether he dealt with his parnosa in an ehrliche way. It's called nososo v'nosato be'emunah. And then the second question is kovato itim leTorah, whether you stayed connected to Torah. So the kovato itim leTorah speaks with the same person. First you ask the person which is involved in his parnosa. You ask him, did you make your parnosa in an ehrliche way? Were you transgressing the limits of halacha or the limits of all different other things? Were you transgressing them or was it okay? Nososo v'nosato be'emunah. And now you ask the very same person, you ask, kovato itim leTorah. So you don't ask the one which sits in Koil, kovato itim leTorah. You ask the businessman, kovato itim leTorah. Why? Now Rashi comes and says a very surprising thing. Perhaps I may tell you that. I remember that I showed this Rashi to Rav Wolbe, my Rebbe, and he was very thrilled from the Rashi. Rashi says like this: because you have to make parnosa. You are obligated to make parnosa. Without parnosa, you can't function in this world. That's why you have to have a kvias time in Torah, in order you shouldn't be driven the whole day after your parnosa. So you are not driven after money, you are driven after the derech eretz, Rashi says, not money. You are nimoshech kol hayom l'derech eretz. That's a danger. So why is that? And what is the eitzah to be kaveh itim leTorah? I would propose a different thing. What's the problem? That you will work the whole day, you will make a glorious decision that you'll work only half a day and the rest you'll learn. Comes Rashi along and says that won't keep. In the end, you'll work the whole day. You can't keep a kvias in derech eretz because that has a tendency to eat up the whole day. You have to have a kvias in Torah that you shouldn't be involved in the business the whole day. Now, why to make like this? Go straight. When the problem is I shouldn't be involved in the business the whole day, I will make the business only half a day. That's wrong. You will not be able to do it because you will be involved in the business the whole day, and you have to be kaveya the other side, not the business. You have to be the kaveya the other side. What is this unbelievable thrive of derech eretz which makes you lose your inner stature, and you will in the end be sold entirely to your work. Why is it? So according to what I understand, it is the Derech Eretz itself. It's not the money. Rashi doesn't say it. He doesn't say, Shelo yimoshech kol hayom acher parnosa. No, after Derech Eretz. So this being involved in the worldly needs, this has a tendency to swallow you. Why? Because you are responsible. Because you are going after a thing which the responsibilities will grow. Everyone who is involved in his business, he knows that the responsibilities are growing. He will not stay the same. And when you are in a business, I don't know why, I never thought, but perhaps that's Rashi, people tell me that when you have a business and it's not growing, it will die. Why can't you have a business which is static? You know, it's all the same. It will not keep up. It will die. It has to grow. Because there is a need that the responsibilities are growing. And the responsibilities are growing because the business is growing. Things are expanding and you'll meet a limit and then you go over that limit because there is still a responsibility to fulfill. And that's the way the Derech Eretz will take all of your personality and swallow everything up. And that's why you have to be Kaveh Itim L'Torah. But now let's contemplate this thing. Now those are the two sides. From one side we have Torah, we want to be a Torah. From the other side you have the involvement in the world, which is a part of what the Borei Olam wants from you. You know? Your skills, your skill set, the way I think you say that, your skill set which you have given from the Borei Olam is there in order it should provide a service for the community. It's not only for you, it's there for a service for the community. And when you have skills which give a service to the community in a certain field, the Borei Olam wants you to be involved in that. He wants that. And you have to be tochen that your parnosa will come out from there. You are responsible for that. And now comes the Torah. But Torah is entirely other ingredient. Torah, you are not responsible for someone else. Torah, you deal with yourself. And you are involved in a world which is very personal for you. I don't think that we can realistically ask from a person which is a businessman, which is involved in business, that he should say a chabura twice a week on Misha Yonosui. It's difficult enough for a person which is the whole day learning to go through Misha Yonosui in a real way. But you can't ask that. That's an unrealistic demand. That's not the point. But you have to be Kaveh Itim L'Torah. The point of the Kaveh Itim L'Torah has to be that the Torah fills you. This is the difference between Torah and involvement with the world. The involvement in the world is the responsibility is outside of you. It's towards the other. It's like a little bit selfless. You are involved in a world which wants from you a thing which is outside of you. And you have to be responsible for that. So the responsibility is taking you out of the daigening for yourself. You are now concentrated on the need of other people. And this has a tendency to grow. Because the needs of other people have a tendency to want more, and you will be more responsible and more responsible. The Torah is built in a different way. The Torah is built that you are filling yourself up. And now those are the two extremes which are in a clash. I don't want to say that this is the end of the pshat in Chazal. But Chazal say something, and we always look at it in a very diminutive way from one side and in a very big way from the other side. He says, the Gemara says, Loi ke midas posov adam midas HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Midas HaKadosh Baruch Hu, kli mole machzik. Kli reikon eina machzik. Midas posov adam, kli reikon machzik, kli mole eina machzik. So always you think, Chazal come to say that the involvement in the world, the midas basar vadam, that's something second class. I think they only say it's a different thing. The point of Torah, which you will be able, machzik, you'll be able to keep, is when you are full with Torah, kli mole. When you are centered on yourself, and this center of yourself gives you a feeling that you are full with the ruchnius. But the point of involvement with the world, midas basar vadam, the center is not within you. The center is that you are like selfless. It's like a kli reikon. You are selfless. You are not concentrated in yourself. You don't think about your own aliyah. You think now about someone else, and you are getting outside of yourself. Then the worldly endeavor will be keeps up, machzik. It will keep up. So I don't know whether you have to learn that Chazal, that they say, midas basar vadam is gar nicht, only midas HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's simply two different kelim, two different endeavors which are there. The one which is based that you are full, that you're learning. And now you see, this kvias itim l'Torah of Rashi can't be only that you're kveya itim l'Torah and have a time frame which is there for you, that you can put your learning inside. No, learning has to fill you up. Because you have to give it a real content which is able to keep the water against the content of your responsibility. Because the content of the responsibility is an unbelievable strong content which will take you the whole day when you are not be kaveh itim l'Torah. So being kaveh itim l'Torah, only this outside shell, that it is 2 hours or 1 hour or 3 hours I put away and there I put in my learning, is not enough. You have to be a kli mole. Yes, you have to be a kli mole. So this is this learning which we as people which are involved in business, we have to learn that again. That we feel full with ourselves. Not only full with the responsibility we have to other people. We feel full with our learning Torah. And now comes the hope which I have in this. You could say, that's too much. How can I be full in Torah? I know myself that I have limited time to learn, and to be full with Torah, I know from the big man, I know big names. I knew Rav Nosson Tzvi, and I know Rav Moshe Arieli, and I know Yossel Schreiber over here. I don't know in America, I don't know the names, but there are names for people which they are full with learning, and they know how to learn. And what do you want from me? I'm full. But now, let's think. Full is dependent on how big is the kli, the cup. When you have a cup which is sheer Chazon Ish, you need more wine. I remember Moshe Soloveitchik had in his vitrina a cup which is definitely bigger than anything. I think it looked like a cup, but it was like a big vase, So this, you need a lot of wine. You need 5 bottles of wine to fill that thing up. So who told you that your kli has to be so big? You have to experience that something fills you up. From my own experience, I know that once in a while I feel full when I said one broche in the Shmona Esra with a certain kavona. One, not the whole Shmona Esra, that's too much, but one broche. But it gave me this dimension that I feel full. That was fulfilling me. This is a danger in today's society where always you look for quantity and you say full. No, full means, and then you give an example from a person which is really the whole day is full. But that doesn't mean full. Kli mole is depending on the kli. When I have a small kli, I can make it mole very easily. When I have a whole day, and that's my kli, then I can have to work like a madman to make that full. When I have even more than that, to be full in a big extent, that could be a work which is impossible for me. But I have then what do we have to do? What do you say? So people say, okay, work harder. So I say, no, make the kli smaller. You'll make the kli smaller. And this is the self-work we have to do. Right. Rashi is 100% right. He doesn't need my haskome. Rashi says that you have to be koveya itim l'Torah, for sure. But this has to be fulfilled with something which makes you full. You have to have your endeavors of kedusha, have to have an ingredient which is something there which makes you full. You understand yourself that something makes you full. Being a human being is when you do something on yourself. I don't want to speak anything against shiurim, which a lot of people which are involved in learning, in working, they attend shiurim. But you have to understand, a shiur is very tricky that it should give you a feeling that you are full. But because a person is built like this, that he makes himself full. His own activity makes him full. So when we want to be full with Torah, tefillah, mitzvahs, we have to find a way that my own activity gives me a feeling that I did something important. I did something which makes sense. I was a kli mole for 5 minutes, for 2 minutes, but it gave me the feeling I am involved, I am there. It filled me up for a short time, but it filled me up. This is the quality which we have to put against, or vis-a-vis, not against, vis-a-vis the involvement in our responsibility. The responsibility is outside of us. I can't go and be responsible to other people and then I say, I feel now very fulfilled. I feel accomplished. That could be. I feel I did the right thing. But I feel full with content, not full with my own gaive, but full with content. I feel when I go to Torah. There I feel responsible. Here I feel full with the content of Torah. So a person wants to stay a ben Torah or wants to be a ben Torah. I know people which they became Baalei Tshuva after they were involved in business and they stayed involved in business. But they became Bnei Torah by being involved in business too. You can't do that. How can you do it? When you find a place where in a short time or in an outside, like seemingly small endeavor, not big, a small endeavor, you are actively involved and you make a difference to yourself. You have a new pshat, you have a new insight, you have a thought in the Parsha Shavua, not a quotation, you have your own thought. You thought an own thing. You have your own thought in tefillah. You have your own hergesh in a Shmona Esrei. You have your own hergesh in a mitzvah. You have your own thing there. And when you have your own thing, then you are kli mole. And you are a kli mole, then you are a ben Torah, which is involved in business. Because you are keeping up your responsibility. It's that what the Borei Olam wants. But you have this possibility from the other side to be full with ruchnius, which you create on your own. Believe me, this is not about going la shomayim. It's not. You can have your own thoughts to a tremendous amount. The only advice which I have, you should speak that through with someone which is perhaps more knowledgeable in Torah. That you shouldn't get to a wrong path. But I myself, I have children which are involved in business, in doing work, and they have thoughts about the Parsha Shavua which they read, Shnai Mikro V'Echad Targum. So it's right, they can read it in Hebrew. So perhaps once in a while you have more difficult, but it's more difficult. But you can have your own thought in a Parsha Shavua. You can have your own thought in this Parsha over here when it's Chayesoro, the finding a Shidduch of Yitzchak or whatever it is. You have your own insight. You have your own heore. You have your own small remark which you have, but you live that. And you are even telling it over, perhaps at home, perhaps to a friend, you discuss that. You feel full with what you do. You are a Ben Torah, which is also involved in business. So this is a general outline which I thought. I think this is a beneficial way to look at this whole sugya, because we did not diminish any one of the sides. Now, work is not only a klolle or something lower, and being a Ben Torah is not only some appearance or some structure you have to keep on. Being a Ben Torah has a deep content to it. And being involved in your achrayus towards the world has a very important content to it. And they are both together in a person which is involved in business and stays a Ben Torah. So I hope that was helpful for you. I hope this was a benefit for the tzibur. That's what I was able to produce. And hopefully that will be good for the tzibur. And I hope that really that makes you to see that it's not an unsurmountable endeavor to stay connected to Torah really and to be involved in the business in a responsible way. They both can go together.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to share some thoughts regarding the important topic of thriving as a Ben Torah in the workplace. The truth is, being a Ben Torah in the workforce is really something that has been from time immemorial. We read in Chazal how numerous Tanaim, Amoraim had professions, they went to work, and obviously were the tremendous Bnei Torah that they were. It's not a new phenomenon. So if we want to know how do we maintain the balance of remaining a Ben Torah, not only remaining a Ben Torah, but thriving as a Ben Torah while in the workforce, we need to turn to the words of Chazal and to learn from them what that means. What do we need to do in order to continue to thrive and to steig while working? There's a Maimer Chazal in Pirkei Avos, it's also in the Avos to Reb Nosson Shammai says, Asei Torascha keva. A person needs to make his Torah the permanent fixture of his life. Umalachtecha arai. And the malacha, the work that he does, is something that's of more of a temporary nature. But what does that mean? What does it mean, Asei Torascha keva? Truth is that the Rishonim address this question. According to the Rambam, Asei Torascha keva means that the bulk of one's time, the majority of the hours of the day, need to be dedicated to Torah study. And then for a few hours, a number of hours a day, that's what a person devotes towards his work, towards his malacha, so that he could eke out a living. Reb Chaim Volozhiner writes that the profession that a person should choose is a profession that a person merely uses his hands in order to do. A blacksmith, a carpenter, a tailor, so that his mind is panui, his mind is free to be able to think and learning and not be mesiach das. If that is what Asei Torascha keva or Malachtecha arai needs to mean, then many of us, unfortunately, due to the current circumstances, the current situations of our workforce, are falling short. Because the truth is, the reality is that most jobs entail many hours of work. Most jobs require an investment of mind, of heart. They require creativity in order to remain competitive. They require commitment. There are deadlines. There's overtime. Within that reality, how could we be Mekayim? Asei Torascha keva Malachtecha arai. What could we do in order to have that mindset that our Torah, our limud, our Torah, our Ruchnias, our Yiddishkeit is keva, Malachtecha arai, when we're investing so much time and koyach and mayach into the work that we do? I'd like to share an approach towards Malachtecha arai, and then afterwards towards Torascha keva, something that I hope will inspire us and be mechazek us and enable us not only to maintain the balance of being a Ben Torah within the workforce, but also to steig, to thrive as a Ben Torah while holding a job. Rabbi Chiel Michal Tukachinsky, in his Sefer Gesher HaChaim in the 3rd volume, tells over a story of a fellow who came to a specific town. Next to the town there was a Beis HaKvaros. So he goes into the Beis HaKvaros and he notices that there are numbers of years on each one of the tombstones. Each matzeva says how many years each person lived. And he's startled to find that each and every one of those tombstones had a very, very young age. This one lived 2 years, this one 2.5, this one 3, this one 10. The oldest age was maybe 18. And he's wondering what's going on. He goes into the town and he sees that there are adults. And he asks somebody, what's pshat in that Beis HaKvaros? What's going on? Why did they all live such a short life? And he said to him, I'll tell you the truth, they really lived, many of them, till middle age, till old age, some of them till ripe old age. But the number of years that we assign to each matzeva in this particular town is not merely how many years the person existed for, but for how many years was he alive? How many of those years were fulfilling, were meaningful? How many of those years were productive in a ruchniistic way? There are 2 types of life. There's one type of life in which we exist. We eat, we drink, we sleep, we make sure that we're healthy, we maintain our existence, our physical existence. We live. But then there are other years of our lives that we're alive, we're chai. At the beginning of Parshas Chayei Sarah, we read about the life of Sarah Imeinu. Vayiyu Chayei Sarah 100 shana ve'esrim shana ve'shava shanim. Shnei Chayei Sarah, says the Aksav HaKabbalah. The Torah Kedosha is telling us Sarah lived for 127 years. Vayiyu Chayei Sarah 100 shana ve'esrim shana ve'shava shanim. But which years are we referring to? The years that she existed or the years that she was alive? Ends the pasuk Shnei Chayei Sarah, Shnei meaning the number 2. Shnei Chayei Sarah, both tracks of Sarah's life, both cycles of calculating life, both the years that she existed and the years that she was productive and alive, both of them were 127 years. And the Malbim learns exactly the same thing regarding the life of Avram Avinu at the end of Chayei Sarah. Ve'ele yemei shnei chayei Avram asher chai 100 shana v'shivim shana v'chamei shanim. Correct the Malbim, what do you mean asher chai? Ele yemei shnei chayei Avram asher chai. What are the extra words asher chai? Says the Malbim, Avram Avinu didn't just exist. Those were years that he was alive. There's 2 tracks, there's 2 simultaneous tracks of our life. The years that we exist and the years that we're alive in a ruchniistic way. Often there's a tug of war between those 2. Sometimes my years that I exist pull me a certain way. And I feel that I want to make sure that I'm eating better and drinking better and sleeping better. And that becomes my focus. And then there's the ruchniistic life, which might require a different track or a different course of action. And sometimes there's a tug of war. Sometimes they don't coexist. Obviously our job, obviously our role in life is to fuse the 2. In Igros Uksavim from the Baal HaPachad Yitzchak, we find that Rav Hutner was asked by a Talmud. He had a Talmud who went out to work and was complaining that it was hard maintaining a double life. When he was at work and together with people, that all that was going, all that was in their mind was the years that they existed. How do I exist in a more productive way? And then when he was in the Beis Medrash, he was a different person. And he's complaining about the double life, and Rav Hutner Zichrona Livracha responds to him, he said, I would have never agreed to a double life. I meant a broader life, a life in which we fuse those 2, where the life that I work, my life in the workplace, it's not a stira, it's not a separate life, it's not a different track which happens to coexist. The Shnei Chayei Sarah are not 2 separate tracks, Shnei, the 2 different tracks, rather, they're tracks that fuse. But how do we do it? How do we maintain that balance? How do we allow the time that we're in the workforce to be malachtecha arai, while I'm so engaged in it with the bulk of the hours of my day, and with so much mind and heart that sometimes we have to put into it? How do I allow that to remain an accessory towards my Chaim Ruchniim? And I'd like to begin with a mashal that I read from Reb Leib Chasman, from the Chevron Mashgiach. Rabbi Leib Chasman says, there was once an artist who enjoyed painting live scenes. He enjoyed painting scenes of farms, of marketplaces, very unlike modern art, things that actually seemed alive, could have been an actual photograph. He goes and he decides one day he wants to paint a wheat field. And he goes to a farmer and he says, do you have any wheat fields? Could I come? Could I draw a picture of one of your wheat fields? And he says, of course. He tells him where to come. He tells him where to meet him. He comes with his canvas and his paintbrushes and his various paints. And he goes over and he takes him. He says, this is my best field. Right now the wheat is at its prime. And he notices that the tops of the wheat are all so heavy, the kernels are so thick and robust that they're not even able to stand up nice and tall on the stalks. Each one is leaning on the next one. And the artist takes one look and he says, that? I'm going to draw a picture of that. It looks like one big yellow carpet, one thing leaning on the other. It doesn't look like wheat. Show me a wheat field where I could see the stalks of wheat. He says, oh, you want the wheat that's not so successful? The wheat that's not so full? Come, I'll take you to another place. And he takes him to a wheat field where you're able to see each stalk standing proud and tall. And the artist says, this is exactly what I want. And he goes and he draws that particular wheat field. Says Reb Leib Chasman, what is the difference between the artist and the farmer? When the artist looks at a stalk of wheat, he's looking at the stalk of wheat. He's looking at each aspect of it. He's looking at the chaff, and he's looking at the kernels, and he's looking at the stem. But that's what he sees, a stalk of wheat. When a farmer is looking at the stalk of wheat, what is he seeing? He's seeing money that he could get from it. He's seeing cake, he's seeing pasta, he's seeing bread. He's seeing the future. He doesn't just see stalks of wheat, how it looks when it stands nice and tall. That's maybe nice for a photo op, but that's not the purpose of the wheat. The purpose of the wheat is to nourish, is to sustain, it's to full. That's the purpose of the wheat. Says Reb Leib Chasman, we put into this world, and yes, we do have to spend time, ala michya ba'ala kalkala, working, making a parnasa, making a living, out there in the workforce. But for what? So that what? What is the purpose of it all? So that I have a certain status? So that I have a certain amount of money? So that I have a certain profession? Is that the end game? The prestige, the status, the profession? What it means, what it represents, what it reflects on the person? Or now that I have that, what could I do with it? Now that I have this particular skill set, how do I utilize that to be marbek vayt shamayim, to connect to Torah, to improve the lives of B'nai Torah, to help Talmidei Chachamim, to help fellow Yidden? What could I do now that I have that, now that I have those resources? When a person lives his life like that and he looks at his assets, not as status, not as an end game, he looks at his assets, he looks at his money, he looks at his skills, and he says, what could I do with it? The malachtacha becomes arai, because the malachtacha is not an end in and of itself. The malacha is that which leads and lends to, and it doesn't make a difference how much time I'm spending. And adarabba, the more creative I am, and the more heart and mind and kayach and mayach that I'm putting into it, is all serving that noble end and that noble purpose. Person has an office. Person has a boardroom, and it's not being used at all hours of the day. Perhaps I could host a parlor meeting for a yeshiva. Maybe I could host a shir. Maybe we could do things with it. I have access to something like that. I have business contacts. Could I use my business contacts? Do I use it only in a way to further the business? Or perhaps now that I have access to these particular contacts, how could I improve the lives of other Yidden? Whether it's financially or medically, or using my contacts, using my know-how to improve the lot of others, to improve the ruchniistic a lot of others. What could I do now that I have these things? A person has geld, a person makes money, a person has siyata d'shmaya with that. Could I use that money to pay for a quality chavrusa? Yes, I could learn with a regular chavrusa, but maybe once a week I could get somebody who's really, really strong. And what about for my kinderlach? If I have that kind of resources, I have that kind of money, that kind of income available. So let me use it to further the lot of my children. Let me use it to sponsor other people's children who could get better chavrusas. Let me offer that to the yeshivas. Let me be makayim mitzvahs behidur. Let me really splurge on matzahs. Let me really splurge on arba minim. Let me sponsor a day of learning, a week of learning, a month of learning in a yeshiva. Let me sponsor a sefer. Let me utilize what I have. Let me look at my resources and say, I have these resources, Baruch Hashem, whether it's money, whether it's profession, whether it's a particular skill set, whether it's contacts. How could I utilize that for a noble cause? The time then that I'm spending in the office, or fixing something, or adjusting something, or researching something, is not merely used for my malacha, but I'm taking that malacha and I'm elevating it and I'm channeling it towards something so much more sublime. This past week's Parsha, we read about the tremendous ashiras of Yitzchak Avinu, and Parshas told us. Yitzchak planted Vayizra Yitzchak. It was a difficult land, it was a difficult year. And Afal Pichein, things grew 100-fold. Mea Sha'arim, Vayebarcheu Hashem. The Torah says, Vayigdal Ish, Yitzchak became great. Vayelach Aloich V'gadel Ad Ki Gadal Ma'oid. There's not even words to describe it, more and more and more. Vayila Miknei Tzayin, Miknei Bakar, Va'avuda Rabba. What is Avuda Rabba? Some Rishonim learn Avuda Rabba means he had many avadim. He had much karka. But how does Rashi explain Avuda Rabba? Rashi says Avuda Rabba means Pu'ula Rabba. He had a lot of Pu'ula, he had a lot of works. A lot of works? We're telling you what he had, we're telling you things. He had Mikneh, he had Bakar, he had Mikneh Bakar, Mikneh Tzayin. What is the Avuda Rabba? And he had a lot of work. The Majid Rebbe in the Divrei Yisrael says Avuda Rabba means he took the things that he had and he used them, he utilized them, he didn't just keep them. With that Mikneh Tzayin, with the Mikneh Bakar, the Avuda Rabba, everything that he had, he utilized them. He was mahana others with them, he was mahana himself with them. And he says that is the derech of tzaddikim. They look at what they have, they take advantage of what they have. Everything that they have is not an end in and of itself. You don't just leave it stagnant. How could I utilize this? How could I utilize the things that I have for a loftier cause? To help the lot of Avdei Hashem, of Avdei Hashem, of fellow Yidden, specifically Talmidei Chachamim. How could I further my own aliyah in Torah? Those of people who are dependent on me, around me. How could I further that? How could I better that now that I'm in this position? Now that I have this clout? Now that I have these particular things. But it's not only having malachta ha'arai. If I want to thrive as a ben Torah in the workforce, asay Torascha keva, that's the Maimer Chazal. I need to make my Torah the fixture of my life, the permanence of my life, the setting of my life. How do I do that when I have a limited amount of time? If I'm in the office from 9 to 5, and who's in the office from 9 to 5 nowadays? Often it's so much more than that, and often I have to give it other thought. I'm putting in less time in learning. How do I make it that my Torah, the Torah that I learn, still has a kviyas to it? When a person's in yeshiva, when a person's in kollel, the setting itself allows a person to lig and learn. There's an Ian Seder, often there's a Bekiya Seder, there's a Halacha Seder, there's a Musa Seder, there's a Shmuz, there's a Shir Klali, there's Vadim. Person's surrounded by it, a person's immersed in it. It's so much easier to lig and learn because I'm surrounded, I'm immersed by the learning, so I lig in the learning. How am I able to lig and learn? How am I able to be immersed in it when I have so little time to be able to do it? How could I make that taka the fixture of my life? Rabbi Sai, I would like to share with you a story that made a tremendous impact on me when I read it the first time, and I think about it so much. The story happened a number of years ago, probably about 100 years ago, 115 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. It happened with an elder chassid, a chassid of the Rebbe Rashab of Lubavitch. His name was Reb Chaim, and he was in his 80s at the time of the story. He was somebody that the whole younger generation looked up to. He was somebody who had made a tremendous impact, that had a tremendous rosham on those around him. And one day they see he comes to the Beis Medrash and he's not himself. He's looking down, he's looking despondent, he's looking sad. And they turn to him and they say, Reb Chaim, what is it? What's making you down? Why are you so forlorn? Why are you so upset? He wasn't talking. Finally, one of the younger chevra comes over to him and he says, we need to know, what is it? Why are you so upset? And he responds, he says, look, I'm moving on in years, I'm not getting younger. And I'm afraid of the Yom HaMisa. I'm afraid of the afterlife. That's why I'm so concerned. That's why I'm so upset. The Bachel was flabbergasted. He says, Reb Chaim, we look up to you. You as perfect a person as we could imagine, as we could fathom. Why are you so concerned? He said, I knew you'd never understand. He says, you have to tell me, what is it? And he says, let me tell you how my life has been for the past, about 70 years. It's been the same thing day in and day out. They didn't go on vacation those days. They didn't leave town. I was here for 70 years since my bar mitzvah. Let me tell you basically the way my day went. How was my day? He says, I would get up first thing in the morning, early in the morning. And when I would wake up, I would see this imaginary sack next to my bed. And I would say Maidani with kavanah, and I would take the Maidani and I would put it in the sack. And then I would wash Netilas Yadayim, I'd wash Negel Vaser, and I'd go take care of my bodily needs with Asher Yatza, with a kind of Shama, and I put that in the sack. And then I get up and I dress myself like a Yid with the right and then the left and under the covers and everything exactly the way I should do, exactly the way a Yid gets dressed. And I put that in the sack. And then I said Birkas HaTorah so that I could already start thinking and learning. And I said that with Kavan, understanding it's a mitzvah deraisa, and I put that in the sack. And I walked to shul. I was Mekayim of Alechtecha V'Aderech. And they said, yeah, we get the idea. And you put that in the sack. And I gave a shir before davening. I put that in the sack. And I daven, and then I put that in the. And he says, by the time I finished Shachris in the morning, before I went to eat so that I could have kayach to learn the rest of the day, so the sack is already bulging. It's already getting full. And an entire day, I'm Oved Hashem, and I'm trying, and I'm doing, and I'm learning, and I'm teaching, and I'm davening, and I'm saying Tehillim, and I'm being native to other people, and everything I do, I put it in the sack. By the time I say Hamapel at night, you can't even close that sack. The sack it's bulging. And then the next morning I wake up and there's another imaginary sack, and I fill it, and I've been filling these sacks my whole life. And the Bacha turns to me and he says, that's exactly my point. So what are you so nervous about? What are you so concerned about? Why are you so down? He says, why am I so down? Because I'm asking myself, if I spent my whole life doing the right thing anyway, why did I have to put it all into a sack when I could have put it into myself? Why was I so busy filling sacks when instead I could have filled myself? I could have internalized what I did. I could have embodied, I could have grown from what I did. Why instead did I utilize my skill set? Why instead did I utilize all the things that I was doing? Didn't I utilize it for myself? Did I just do it and put it in a sack? Rabbi Sai, we do make time to learn. Of course we make time to learn. But we have to, in order to lig and learn, in order to be able to lie in the learning, to be immersed in the learning has to lig in ourselves. In order for us to lig and learn, the learning has to lig in ourselves. We have to internalize that learning. The learning has to become a part of ourselves. Let me explain to you what I mean. The Ramban writes, we all know the Ramban had to leave Aragon. He won a debate, I should say, against Pablo Cristiani, and he published that debate. The king of Aragon told him he had to leave. He wrote a letter to his son. We know the famous Igeras HaRamban. And in that Igeras HaRamban, the Ramban writes, Ka'asher takum min ha-sefer, whenever you get up from learning something, techapes ba'asher lamadata, so look into what you learned, search, seek from that which you learned. How could I apply? How could I take something? What could I do with that which I learned? That's the instruction of the Ramban. When we get up from learning something, there has to be a takeaway. See, if I'm learning halacha l'maisa, it's much more simple. Okay, how does that affect my daily hanhaga? How's it going to change my Shabbos? How's it going to change my Pesach? Whichever halachas I'm learning. If I'm learning Musar, how's it going to change the way I think, the way I misyaches towards other people, the way I misyaches to mitzvahs? How does that work? How is that going to change it? But what happens when I'm sitting and learning Gemara? What happens when I'm sitting in front of a blat Gemara? I'm learning Psachim, I'm learning Erevin, I'm learning Shabbos, I'm learning Chulin. There's not always things in what I'm learning that have a practical application. Techapes ba'asher lamadata. Rabbi say, I want to make the following hatzah. If you have an hour that you have to spend learning, please learn less. Don't learn for an hour. Only learn for 45 minutes. I repeat, if you have an hour to learn, don't learn for an hour. Only learn for 45 minutes. And then take the next 15 minutes and chazer what you learned. Go over what you learned. The best time for chazara is when it's clearest, which is right after you've learned it. That's when you'll be able to really understand it. You'll be able to really get it clear. You'll be able to review it well. And after you've reviewed it, if you have time, and make the time, don't just chazer it inside. Chazer the shakla v'tarya, what happened here? Speak it out and take that with you. If you have 2 hours to learn, don't learn for 2 hours. Learn for an hour and a half, and then chazer. And then chazer the shakla v'tarya, and take that with you, so that you're able to think about it afterwards, so that you're able to come back to it and chazer it again later on that day, and you're not relearning it again. Because when you left it, there were still points that were unclear. You're coming back to something that you were able to go through clear, that you knew the shakla v'tarya. If your main time for learning is in the morning, and you do this chazara, make time at some point a little bit later in the day, maybe once, maybe twice, to go over it. So when you come back the next day to your Seder, you're coming back to something that's already in your mind. You know it. You're continuing it. You're not just going back to a kfiyas that this is the time that I learn. I'm engaged. I'm involved. It's part of me. If you're learning at night, so the next morning, maybe it's harder for me to learn in the morning. But if that was the time that I learned, I left with a clarkite, but I've still got to make sure that I have some time. I chazered, I internalized it, I got the shakla v'tarya. Maybe there's a ha'ara that I have, jot it down. Notebooks are not expensive. Take a notebook, keep a notebook every time you sit down to learn, with a pen, in case there's something that's not so clear. There's a good kasha, there's a ha'ara, there's a maimer chazal. I wish I'd know more about it. I have to share this with somebody else. Let's allow the Torah to live in us. Because if the Torah lives in us, then we live in the Torah. And then the Torah becomes, Asay Torascha Keva, it's our kviyas, it's where we're at. And we're able to thrive that way. It surrounds our day. We're living in that Torah, we're thinking about it, we're coming back to it. It's not just something that we do, it's something that we're putting into ourselves. Something that's part of our psyche, it's part of us. Even if we don't have that much time. How do I thrive? How do I thrive as a Ben Torah in the workforce? 2 parts. Number 1, the malacha, my work, needs to have an element of arai. It doesn't mean I don't do well in business. It doesn't mean I'm not a great doctor. It doesn't mean that I don't, if I'm a plumber or an electrician, that I don't try to do the best that I can and be competitive and try to get a good reputation and do a good job. But let me realize that that's not the tachlis. It's not my identity. It's not my essence. I need to do, now that I have an achrayas, to utilize my skills. I have to give meiser from my skill set, not just from my money. I'm going to utilize for sure the money, but the skills and my malacha, my avodah, I'm going to use that in order to further the betterment of other yidden, of Talmidei Chachamim, of Bnei Torah, of Moshe Torah. I'm going to utilize that in order to channel, in order to better, so my malacha is arai, because it's not the end result, it's not the end game. But I need Torascha Keva as well. The Torah that I learn is something that's a part of me. It's something that I retain. I don't just learn. I learn and I ingest it. I learn and I digest it. I learn and I think about it afterwards. If I have time to learn, I'm going to learn a little bit less time. And chazer. And know it. And repeat it. And if somebody could have a seder, a 5-minute seder somewhere in the day, to give over something from that which he learned in order to share with somebody else. Ma toiv u'ma naim. In this week's parsha, in Parshas Vayetze, this past week's parsha, the parsha we learned yesterday. In Parshas Vayetze we read, Yaakov Avinu is on his way to get married, he's on his way to Beis Lavan. And he spends 14 years in the yeshiva of Shem Ve'ever. 14 years, Yaakov Avinu was an ish tam yoshev ahalim. His whole life he was sitting and learning. He was 63 years old when he left. What was there more to learn on the way to Shem Ve'ever? Many of us are familiar with Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, Zecharna Levracha's Pshat. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky says until that point he was learning in yeshiva, he was learning in Beis Yitzchak, in the house of Yitzchak Avinu. That's one type of learning. But when one's going out to Beis Lavan, one's going out into surroundings that have a different value system. Person's going to be there, is going to be working, is going to be engaged, going to be spending his days and his nights like Vitaka had with Yaakov Avinu. Among people who have a different value system, who worship money, people who worship status, people who worship assets, What could I do in order to maintain my integrity as a Ben Torah? For that I have to have a different type of learning. I'm not living in it in its conventional sense. So he went to Beis Shem, who lived through the Mabul, Beis Aver, who lived through the Dara Palaga, through the Dara Flaga. And when he was there, he grew that appreciation. I can't tell exactly how Yaakov Avinu did it, but what we need to take from it is, there's a different type of learning, a different quality of learning, that we need to make sure that the Torah, that we live in the Torah by the Torah living in us. Living in us means that we're able to retain the Torah. We're able to sustain the Torah. We're able to maintain the Torah. And this way we won't only be keeping the balance between a Ben Torah and somebody who's working in the workforce, but rather we'll be able to thrive, to steig, to continue growing as B'nai Torah, B'nai Aliyah, while we're working. Ala Micha v'ala Kalkala, Yehi Ratzon Shetishra Shchina B'maisei Yadeichem. Thank you very much.